Hey, welcome all to the FSHD Society radio show. Thanks for being here. This is another episode of Hot Off the Press. This is where we kind of jump at you with some quick information about what's going on in the FSHD Society. We bring in guests that are directly connected with the FSHD Society and talk either is it the fundraising that's happening right now? Is it some type of research that's going on? Is it what is Hot Off the Press for this episode? Well, here to explain what we're talking about today is Jamshid Arjomand. Jamshid, welcome back. You've been on this platform several times. It's always great to see you, but there might be some people out there that don't know who you are. Shame on them. So why don't you do like a quick, introduction of what's your role at the FSHD Society?
Great. Thank you very much, Tim, for having me back. I'm actually very pleased to be here. I've heard the great news that your listenership has doubled, I think, since we started the program. So that's fantastic news, and hopefully this presentation won't decrease the listenership, but add to it. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm the Chief Science Officer for the Society, and so just very quickly, my background, I'm a neuroscientist by training. I've worked in pharmaceutical industry, startup biotech, and also I did a fairly long extended stint at another nonprofit working on Huntington's disease. So I've seen drug discovery research both from the pharmaceutical for-profit side as well as in the nonprofit in a rare disease indication. And prior to coming to the Society, actually, I worked at a small biotech where we had an FSHD program. So I had become familiar not only with the FSHD, the science behind it, but also with other neuromuscular diseases that quite often we can borrow from. Advances that are made in Duchenne's or other diseases always are a good foundation for us to learn from and to apply their learnings so we can advance the field of FSHD.
Excellent. Yeah, and you've been a great addition to our community. You clearly have said, okay, you've known about FSHD prior to this time here. And how long have you been here? How long have you been with the group?
I think actually February it's my 4th year, so I'm either past an anniversary or I'm approaching the anniversary or 4 years. Okay. This is it's time just flies, and obviously, when I joined, things were very different. It was in 2019, very early 2019, and so just about a year later, the whole pandemic started, and kind of was a little bit of a curveball, if you like baseball terms.
I do.
We had to kind of adapt along the way about how we were going to approach and how to engage with the community and with the researchers in the field.
So then for me, I always look and go, okay, this is where we are now. I always have a tendency to kind of look back, reflect, what have we done? How far have we gone? And of course you look forward, there's always goals to hit. But 4 years in, granted, you've had a lot of curveballs, as you put it, with the pandemic, like so many of us have had. But as you look back, maybe on a reflection point, what is that? What does it look like to you? Where have we come?
Great question. Why don't we take it even a step further back, and when we're asked, what is the FSHD Society?
Yeah.
Our phrase is we're a research-focused patient advocacy group.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot baked into that. Obviously, the patient advocacy side is very broad, and a lot of my colleagues at the Society are involved in that. So it's, providing support, providing educational material, getting groups organized. There's obviously a major fundraising component to that, but it's also advocating on the communities, on the patient community's behalf, to pharmaceutical companies, to hopefully to insurance companies to provide service, or to even government agencies to learn about FSHD, so it becomes kind of a priority focus for them. The research side is also can be very broad. And I think maybe that's one way of looking at it. I think most people think of research maybe as the research that happens at universities, the academic type of research. And for the most part, this is something that the society has historically done. I think the society's been around for 30 years or more, and they've always been funding grants, providing grants to academic research. And we have to think back, 30 years ago, there was very little known about FSHD, what the cause was. People knew it was genetic, but they didn't know much more beyond that. So it took a lot of basic research, a lot of, really incredible genetics that was being developed at the time to identify DUX4 as the toxic gene in FSHD. And we continue to fund grants, but then since I've joined, we've really tried to expand the scope of research to try to address some of the type of work that needs to be done to develop a drug. So drug development is very different from academic research, where they're trying to find a mechanism of why something happens, how something happens. Drug development is how do you interfere with that process? How do you fix it?
Right.
And it requires kind of a different set of tools, a different kind of understanding, and then taking a drug that's being developed through the clinical process is something completely different as well. There's a lot of additional parts that need to be put in place for a drug to be able to successfully go through the trial. And the success isn't just that the drug is effective and works, but it actually has to make it through all the stages. So it has to be safe, it has to be effective, but you need to make sure that you can recruit enough people to show that it's effective. And there's a lot of components, a lot of bits and pieces that need to be in place. A lot of the puzzle pieces need to be there for anybody to engage in.
Yeah, because I think people get confused sometimes or misled of, okay, what is FSHD Society really about? And I think you spelled it out, really pinpointedly, like not necessarily in drug development. We play a real big role in eliminating the best possible, way we can, those hurdles, pitfalls in the process of getting a drug through the pipeline. I mean, is that a little more accurate?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think this is something that probably should be said. Even so we should need to be a little bit more clear with that. We're not developing drugs, so the society isn't developing drugs. I've actually worked for organizations that did drug development, and then you kind of become in a conflict of interest with the pharmaceuticals you're trying to help because they see you as a competitor. And we don't want that to happen. We are drug agnostic. I think Mark Stone, our CEO, always says we're drug agnostic. We would like as many drugs to be available for the community as soon as possible. So maybe another way of looking at it is like, what are the things that would entice a pharmaceutical company to engage in FSHD? So, taking a step back, when I joined, there were, to my knowledge, maybe about 4 companies that had active programs in FSHD. So they were actively developing a drug, and they were in early stages. And by the end of that year, I think there was only 1 left. So 3 of the companies dropped out for various reasons. We now mentioned that there's over 20 companies in the space, and some of them are very small, some of them are larger pharmaceuticals, which is phenomenal because we really have seen this increase in engagement by the pharmaceutical sector to really, because they think that this is something that they can engage. And so what are the components? And I'm trying to list those in my head. So basically it's a risk assessment. So before you start a program, you kind of need to know enough about the biology of the disease so you can develop a plan of action of how you're going to interfere with it. So that basic research we've been funding for 30 years, absolutely critical to helping set the stage. And we're not the only ones. Obviously, NIH, Muscular Dystrophy Association, Friends, other organizations have all chipped into this so we know enough about the biology. But then there are other things that pharmaceutical needs. So for instance, they need models, they need assays, they need patient biopsy, patient cells. Those are typically generated in academic labs, and it becomes sometimes very difficult for industry to access them. So if somebody is developing an assay and they want to test it in a human cell, it's challenging for them to find sources of that. Thankfully, there's biobanks that have been set up, and part of the things that I do when a company kind of is interested in the FSHD, they'll reach out to us and they say, where can we find some patient cells so we can test our concept?
Yeah.
And so we put them in contact with the right people, and they usually get access to those. So that's another hurdle, that if they don't have access to these reagents, they can't really move their program forward, and it will take them too long, and it costs too much money to start something from scratch. And who wants to reinvent the wheel when there's reagents sitting around somewhere that you can tap into? Yeah. So that's something that we do, and thankfully there are these biobanks have been set up, and we provide the introduction for that. But then
I mean, it sounds like, to kind of frame that for people, that it's like, pharma here, companies here, and let's just be real, everybody. That's why they're a company. They're doing things to make business. They're evaluating risk. They do want to help people, but yet they're a company. They want to, profit from this. And then there's the community that's affected by the disease. So FSHD Society is more or less the bridge. You're trying to make the path cleaner to get the two somewhat connected.
Exactly. We're trying to remove as many of the hurdles early on, as well as the drug development pipeline as it progresses. We want to try to remove any obstacles, any hurdles. And essentially the key word maybe is de-risk it for the companies, because if they know they don't have to, climb this big hill on their own, that it's part of it has already been, the path's been carved out for them, it will just make it more enticing. So there are other absolutely critical factors, like for instance, are there outcomes, are there tests that they can use in a clinical setting to see if their drug is effective or not? So a lot of these things are still in development, but is there an infrastructure to conduct clinical trials? So, the Clinical Trial Research Network, this is a network of over a dozen now sites in the US. Now there are additional sites in Canada and sites being added in Europe. All of these sites have the expertise in FSHD diagnosis, treatment, and also testing. So they can all be engaged in a clinical trial setting and run the same test to see across a large population is, how is the disease progressing, and is the drug actually doing what it's supposed to do?
Right.
So that infrastructure is absolutely critical. We helped kind of set that up. There's been a lot of funding that's come in from MDA, from NIH, and now Solve FSHD to expand it. But we also, early on when I came, we were looking to expand the CTRM that had 8 sites with 4 more sites. So this is something that we did. We went from 8 to 12, and I think now we're around 18, 20, I don't know how many, there's more and more sites being added. And it's just an incredible infrastructure that the pharmaceutical companies can tap into to help with their clinical trials. And then, obviously another really important thing is with, as you want to launch clinical trials, you need volunteers. And that is something that we also do. Part of our patient engagement and advocacy group is to make sure that the community is aware of all that's happening and understands what's being asked of them if they participate. And so we help with recruitment. We help with a lot of other things too. What I've seen that's really been amazing is pharmaceutical companies want to hear directly from the patient community. What are they looking for in a treatment? How is the disease affecting them? And this is something that 10, 15 years ago, I don't think was as rampant, as not very many groups did that. And now it's all the different groups that we work with want that. So we help put these focus groups for them so they can hear directly from the community on what the community is looking for, and that helps also shape their program, how they're going to run the clinical trials and everything. So that's a very important service that we can provide.
Yeah, it all comes down to if you can get the interest from the drug companies, pharma, small or large. Clearly that's been happening. If you went from, you said 4 when you started, 3 fell off, 1's left, now it increased back up to 20 involvement. Okay, so that's happening. The wheels are in motion now. How do we get more people involved? Because you could have like a couple, correct me if I'm wrong, you could have a couple trials happening at the same time, right? And they're actually more or less competing for the same people, right, to be in their trial.
Yeah, they could be. So right now, I think we have the Fulcrum's phase 3 trial is ongoing. Mm-hmm. They're recruiting over 300 people worldwide, actually in Europe and in the US and Canada. Mm-hmm. There are 2 more trials that are about to start. I think one of them may have started at one site. And there are at least 2 more in the fairly late planning stages that hopefully might take off towards the end of the year at some point. And then on top of that, there's also the natural history study MOVE and MOVE Plus that the Clinical Trial Research Network is taking on. So this is a validation of a lot of the endpoints that are going to be used in the clinical setting. So they're still developing new outcome measures. These are the tests that you use in a trial, and they're validating some of those. So that's a very important study as itself. So, there's a lot happening, and we all know that not everybody will qualify for every type of trial. Yeah. There's always these inclusion-exclusion criteria, and so I think I've seen this. I think Lee may have presented this at another meeting that I've been at too. They've done the calculation that if you start off with maybe 100 volunteers, based on the demand of the trial, based on the eligibility criteria, you may end up with maybe 10. 1 in 10 might qualify and be able to participate in the study. Wow. And some of these trials are quite demanding. They require like a whole day to go to a clinic. There might be some travel involved. Expense. And and that's quite demanding. If people are working full time or they have a family, it's quite difficult to every couple of months to take that time off to go and participate in a trial. Mm-hmm. So it's not just age limits or disease severity that might exclude some people. It's also just the time commitment required. And so one of the things that we do also is by having pharmaceuticals come and give presentations on what the trial is going to look like, it helps explain what the demands might be, how long a trial might take. A phase 1 study usually is shorter, but it has a lot of touch points. Phase 2 is going to be longer, but every visit is going to be very long because they're trying to test out as many outcome measures as possible. So it's a very exhausting, demanding trial, and that can continue. And then the phase 3 obviously is very exciting, but that can go on for quite a long time.
Yeah. So with all the interest, pharmaceutical companies coming in, we have, you mentioned, different trials kind of locked and loaded. Some are getting more ready to go. The future seems bright, but yet it's still a little ways off because of how long it takes for all these things, right? So how do we help accelerate that as a community? Is it simply just getting involved as much as you possibly can?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And I think there's different groups can do different things. So for instance, how I started thinking about it was very shortly after I joined the society. Mark and June, who were already here, had organized this industry collaborative meeting. Yeah. And that industry collaborative, you may have heard me talk about it before, it really was seminal to how we shaped what we ended up doing the following years and still shaping what we're doing going forward. Part of that meeting, so we invited the industry groups that we knew were active, the 4 that had programs, as well as a handful of other companies that were interested in the space but didn't have an official active program in their pipeline. And we had the regulatory agencies. Also, that was an opportunity to get them involved and make sure that they learn about the disease. But the focus really was, what are the gaps? What are the hurdles? For those of you who are in the field, what are the big obstacles that you see coming up that you wish there was a solution for?
Mm-hmm.
And more or less, all of them mention the same things. They need good outcome measures. They need an infrastructure to run their trials through. They need, when they get to the trial stage, they want to make sure that there are patients that have been genetically diagnosed that can participate.
Mm-hmm.
Those were all some of the same consistent things we heard, not only from the ones that were in the field, but from the other companies on the sideline. Like, yes, if these things were solved, that would reduce the risk for us, and we would look at the disease differently and probably engage with it. And I think that what we've done over the past 4 years, we haven't been able to solve a lot of these things, but we've tried to create that infrastructure, this collaborative environment where industries, instead of trying to invent the wheel on their own every single time, maybe they talk more to each other. So when we have the 360 meetings at a CTRN site, we usually have a couple of the pharmaceutical companies present, and they've gotten to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
So they are much more willing to share information and work together to solve some of these things. And that's what I try to do, is can we create a program if there's a type of experiment or a study that needs to be done that will benefit everyone?
Yeah.
Can we get everybody to chip into it so we can get that study done faster and do it in a way that will help everyone?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, one example of this approach was for the genetic testing. To enter a clinical trial, one of the prerequisites is to have a clinically approved genetic test.
Yeah.
And so we put together this direct to the community type of testing where they could call a genetic counseling group, get the genetic counseling. If they were eligible, they would have a clinically approved genetic test done for free. And we raised money from industry and we matched it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were trying to kind of pilot that study, and we got enough money raised for to test 150 volunteers. And so these are all people who are within the general inclusion criteria of a trial.
Mm-hmm.
18 to 65, they have a clinical diagnosis, so they are manifesting some of the symptoms of FSHD, and now they have the genetic confirmation. So they would be able to enroll in a study in a trial. So that's 150 people in the span of about 4 or 5 months that we were able to add to the pool of volunteers for upcoming trials. What we'd like to do now is that programs seem to work well, so there are a couple ways forward. A pharmaceutical company that wants to run a trial can actually put money into it and run all of their volunteers through it and get the genetic testing done fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Or a bunch of pharmaceuticals could continue funding it as an evergreen program. So it keeps going, and it just, if we plan for like 200-300 people every year, we can price that out and know how much it will cost. And so if everybody chips in 20, 30, whatever it is, $1,000, we can actually get that number through on an annual basis. And we'll, let the community know that this is available for you. So if you want to participate, please make sure to get tested.
So this is another hurdle that you're taking away.
It's just another hurdle, and and you have to do it in advance, right? Because without a genetic diagnostic,
you can't take the next.
Enroll.
Yeah, you can't even enroll. You're absolutely right. So it's recognizing what those are, what those issues are, even like voice of the patient, all these things. These are all about what is the hurdle and how do we take care of it as a society, hence helping the community, hence helping pharma, and then this equals cure, treatment, etc. So
and thank you for bringing the voice of the patient up, because that was something that I did not know existed. But when we had that first industry collaborative meeting, Well, the regulatory agencies, FDA, basically told us, hey, we want to hear from the patients about what they
Right.
need, what they want. So we have this mechanism we've set up. It was news to me. I didn't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked into it, and sure enough, they have this program. It's called the Externally Led Patient-Focused Drug Development Program, which we call Voice of the Patient because it's a mouthful otherwise. But it's basically you get testimonials, and we created a survey, and then we got people to participate, and we have a report that the FDA now has. And when a drug comes up for review by the FDA, they have that report about directly from the community is what's important to them, what are they looking for in their treatment, and that's really important. Other things we're doing, so in anticipation of a drug being approved, at some point you're going to want to need to have the insurance companies cover the cost of it. So for the insurance companies to do the math and say, well, if the cost the drug costs this much, what are the benefits? How do we save in other areas? Because they're a business too. So we are doing this true cost of FSHD. It's called a health economics report. And we're trying to figure out not only what are the claims that the community has over a lifetime through their insurance or through Medicare, but what are the out-of-pocket costs? These are the things that usually don't get captured. So loss of employment, or when you need help, or family members, caregivers, their time is also valuable. And so we're trying to include that in the total cost of living with the disease over a lifetime. And, hopefully that will convince insurance companies that, oh yeah, whatever the price of the drug is, it's way worth it to the society as a whole to pay for that, because otherwise without it, the costs are a lot more.
Yeah, and that's what FSHD Society continues to do. And always thinking forward, it appears, knowing what those little pitfalls and issues could be, addressing them ahead of time. So this pipeline basically doesn't have clogs. We want to keep it moving forward. It's going to take enough natural time as it is to get things in place, and any little hiccup is just going to, make that situation worse. So thank you, Jamshid, for kind of, spelling it out a little bit for us, kind of giving it like, okay, what is really all of this encompassing work, the science of it? We get the clinicians in, we talked about, a certain goal of date and when we want this done, but what does that mean? And what does the FSHD Society do exactly? And all that hard work to raise money and funds, what does that go to? That's really the best explanation, right? That we can offer in this time frame of a hot off the press type episode. But it's very important for people to know that this is valuable work. Without it, we're kind of stuck in the mud a little bit.
Yeah, and if I may add, I think one of the things that's right now is really weighing on my mind, I think a lot of my colleagues at the Society, is it's really exciting. If we have, let's say within the end of the next year, we have 5 trials that are going to be happening side by side.
Right.
How do we make sure that all of them get enrolled as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
Remember, as the cost of drug development really increases as you go from the basic research into the clinical trials. So if a company, if it takes them twice as long to recruit for a trial, that can increase the cost substantially.
That's true.
So that's really germane in our mind. Like, how can we make sure that none of these trials that are going to start are going to be shorted and have a difficulty recruiting? So this is, I think, what my colleagues are doing now through hopefully this program and other programs like it, to just make the community aware that it's really important for people to identify themselves or to think about whether they want to participate in trials, and let us know so we can alert them of upcoming trials, of ways to get engaged with these trials or these studies that are so critical for drug development.
Yeah, I think that's really the final thought to it, is the involvement, because if you have those trials lining up and there's not enough people to get into it, then it's going to die on the vine. It's going to slow it down, and then of course increase the cost, as Jamshid mentioned. So all bad things. So it sounds like the key component is involvement. And for ourselves as a community, yeah, you see the hurdles. You know, it takes some time from your family, or it could be difficult because of your financial situation or geographically where you're located. But if we as a community can do everything possible to eliminate some of those hurdles on our end, then hopefully we can, meet the call when we're asked to respond to some of these trials, so we can get involvement to keep it moving forward. Well,
yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jamshid. It
Very
was
well
awesome
said.
talking to you.
Thank you for summarizing my.
Well, that also proves I'm paying attention. That's really what it is. That's really no. You're always fun to talk to, Jamshid. You always put it in the right perspective, I think, for all of us to understand what our goals are. And then it, of course, re-energizes, I think, the community to move forward. We're on the right path, and we have the right people walking with us, and you're one of those people. So thank you
so much.
So thanks, guys, for all listening to Hot Off the Press. Look forward to another episode again of the FSHD Society Radio. Thanks for being here on this episode. Take care.
Thank you very much.